The transport ship landed on Kelros Prime with a loud thud that shook the ground. Dust clouds rose around the landing pad as engines cooled down. Dongwu stepped out first, his boots hitting the alien soil. The air smelled strange, like metal, mixed with something rotten. Behind him, Somin followed, carrying her research equipment in heavy bags. "Welcome to the edge of the galaxy," Dongwu said, looking around at the small colony. Buildings made of different materials stood next to each other. Some looked like giant shells, others like crystal towers. Each one belonged to a different alien species. So-Min pulled out a device that beeped as she pointed it around. "The readings are crazy here, no wonder nobody wants to stay long." She wiped sweat from her face. Even though it was morning, the heat was already getting bad. They walked toward the colony center, where different aliens moved around doing their daily work. Dongwu had seen many alien species before, but this place had more variety than anywhere else. Tall, thin creatures with blue skin walked next to short, round ones covered in fur. Some had multiple arms, others had no arms at all. "There," So-Min pointed ahead. "That must be the meeting place." A large building stood in the center of the colony. It looked like someone had taken pieces from 10 different structures and stuck them together. The entrance was wide enough for the biggest aliens, but also had smaller doors for tiny ones. Inside, the noise hit them like a wall. Dozens of different voices spoke in languages that sounded like music, grinding metal or bubbling water. The smell was even stronger here, a mix of all the different alien scents. Veltar noticed them first. The Krillian was hard to miss, standing nearly 3 meters tall with a body covered in dark, shiny plates. His 4 arms moved as he spoke to other expedition leaders. When he saw the humans, his large eyes focused on them. "So, Earth finally sends someone," Veltar said in heavily accented galactic standard. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "You are late by 300 years. Dongwu smiled. "Better late than never, right?" Veltar made a sound that might have been laughter. "Perhaps, but you come to face the same impossible task as all others. The thermic marshlands have defeated 17 different species. They have consumed our best technology, our brightest minds, our strongest bodies." So-Min set down her equipment. "We'd like to see this swamp for ourselves." "Swamp?" Another voice joined them. Roku glided over on legs that looked more like tentacles. His Thendari body was smooth and wet, built for water life. "It is not merely a swamp, human. It is death itself, boiling and hungry." Roku's skin changed colors as he spoke, showing his emotions. Right now it displayed deep orange, frustration mixed with sadness. "My people are born in water. We swim before we walk. But this water, it kills us faster than any others." Veltar's plates clicked together. "Roku speaks truth. The thermic marshlands span an entire continent. The water temperature reaches 200 degrees. The acid can dissolve Krillian armor in minutes. Toxic gases rise from vents in the bottom, and the creatures—" He stopped talking. "What creatures?" Dongwu asked. "Things that hunt in boiling water," Veltar continued. "They glow in the dark and move faster than our fastest ships. They are drawn to anything that enters their domain. Size does not matter to them. They have destroyed our largest expedition vehicles and our smallest scout drones." So-Min opened her equipment case and pulled out a tablet. "What about the other side? What's so important that everyone keeps trying?" Roku's skin shifted to bright blue, excitement mixed with greed. "Quantum crystals," Not just small deposits, but formations larger than cities. Pure quantum crystals that can power starships for centuries. One small piece is worth more than most planets. The Galactic Council has officially declared the crossing impossible, Veltar added. Too many lives lost, too many resources wasted. They say anyone who tries again is a fool. Dongwu looked out through a large window that faced toward the marshlands. In the distance, he could see steam rising from the swamp. Even from here, the heat made the air shimmer like water. How many have tried? 17 species, hundreds of expeditions, Veltar answered. The Zorlons tried to freeze sections of the swamp. The water was too deep, and their machines broke down. The Hexani used force fields to push the water away. The creatures attacked their generators. The Quinn built submarines. The acid ate through the hulls. What about flying over it? Somin asked. Roku's skin turned dark purple. The gas. Vents create unpredictable air currents. The toxic fumes reach high into the atmosphere. 3 aerial expeditions crashed. Their ship still lies somewhere in the marshlands, probably melted by now. Veltar led them outside to a viewing platform. From here, they could see the edge of the marshlands clearly. The water looked angry, with steam rising constantly and bubbles breaking the surface. Sometimes bright lights moved under the water, the creatures Veltar had mentioned. See those metal pieces near the shore? Veltar pointed with one of his 4 arms. Those are remains of expeditions, ships, vehicles, protective suits. The swamp keeps everything that enters it. Somin aimed her device toward the swamp. The readings made her eyes go wide. The energy levels are incredible. This isn't just hot water. There's something else happening here. Many have said the same thing, Roku noted. Scientists, engineers, mystics, all have theories, none have answers. Dongwu studied the shoreline carefully. He noticed something the others hadn't mentioned. What are all those shell-like things scattered around? Veltar's plates darkened. The remains of fallen expedition members. When the swamp claims someone, sometimes pieces wash back to shore. We do not speak of such things. Different species handle death differently, Roku added quietly. Those remains are considered sacred by some, cursed by others. Most prefer to forget they exist. Somin was still taking readings. The chemical composition is unlike anything in our databases. It's not just superheated water and acid. There are compounds here that shouldn't exist in nature. Which is why, Veltar said firmly, the crossing remains impossible. Your species is young and confident. Perhaps that is good. But confidence alone will not carry you across the thermic marshlands. Dongwu continued looking at the scattered remains near the shore. His engineering mind was already working, seeing patterns where others saw only failure. We'll see about that. As the day ended, the humans returned to their assigned quarters. The colony grew quieter as different species followed their own sleep cycles, but the marshlands never slept. Steam continued rising. Creatures continued glowing in the depths, and the impossible barrier remained exactly that. Impossible. At least, that's what everyone believed. 3 days after arriving on Kelros Prime, Dongwu and Somin had seen enough failed expeditions to understand why everyone called the crossing impossible. But instead of studying the swamp like other species did, they found themselves drawn to something else entirely. Look at this, Somin said, kneeling beside a piece of dark, curved material near the shoreline. This shell fragment is completely undamaged. The swamp acid didn't even scratch it. Dongwu picked up another piece. this one lighter and more flexible. And this one bent, but didn't break. Whatever creature this came from, their natural armor was incredible. They had been collecting samples for 2 days now, much to the confusion of the colony's other residents. While the Krillians worked on improved force field generators and the Thundari developed new acid-resistant alloys, the humans gathered what everyone else considered garbage. Tae-ho arrived that morning on the supply shuttle, bringing with him equipment the others had requested from Earth. He was younger than Dongwu, with quick hands and a mind that understood materials better than most computers. "So this is the famous impossible swamp," Tae-ho said, setting down his cases. "Looks hot." "It's more than hot," So-min replied, showing him her readings. "The water temperature varies between 180 and 220 degrees. The acid levels change constantly. And look at this." She pointed to strange readings on her device. "The creatures in there generate their own electromagnetic fields." Tae-ho whistled softly. "No wonder regular technology fails. Electronics would go crazy in those conditions." Yoonji was the last to arrive, and she brought military efficiency with her. She had served in the Terran Defense Force for 12 years before becoming a logistics coordinator. Her job was to make sure expeditions had everything they needed to succeed. "I've reviewed all the previous expedition reports," Yoonji said, spreading out digital files on a portable table. "Every species tried to fight the swamp with technology. Bigger force fields, stronger materials, more powerful engines. None of them worked with what the swamp offered." "What do you mean?" Dongwu asked. Yoonji pointed to images from failed expeditions. "Look at these. The Zorlans brought ice machines to cool the water. The Hexani brought energy barriers to push it away. The Quinn brought submarines to go under it. Everyone brought solutions from their home worlds." So-min understood first. "But none of them used what was already here." "Exactly." Yoonji pulled up more images. Every expedition left behind materials, ships, tools, protective gear, and every creature that died in the swamp left behind natural armor, shells, scales. 300 years of material just sitting there. Tae-ho picked up the shell fragment So-min had found. He pulled out a small testing device and ran it over the surface. "This is amazing. The molecular structure is unlike anything I've seen. It's not just heat-resistant. It actively disperses thermal energy." "The Krillians call it sacred," Dongwu said. "Veltar told me their people believe disturbing the dead brings bad luck." "Most species have similar beliefs," Yoonji noted. "The Thundari think touching death-touched materials will poison their life essence. The Zorlans believe the spirits of the dead will curse anyone who uses their remains." So-min stood up, dusting off her hands. "But humans don't have those restrictions." "Not exactly," Dongwu said. "We respect the dead, but we also believe in making their sacrifice meaningful. If someone died trying to cross that swamp, they'd probably want their death to help others succeed." Tae-ho was now testing multiple shell fragments with different devices. Each species has different protective adaptations. Krillian shells are incredible at thermal dispersion. Thundari bioplastic flexes without breaking. These crystalline scales from the Vorthan, they're almost completely acid-proof. "You're thinking what I'm thinking, aren't you?" Dongwu asked. "Layered protection," Tae-ho confirmed. "Not one material trying to do everything, but different materials working together, each one handling what it does best." Yoonji was already making calculations. "We'd need enough material to build protective suits for a small team. Shells, scales, bioplastic. There's plenty scattered around the shoreline. The question is whether we can work with it without offending every other species in the colony. Let's start small. So-Min suggested. Collect samples for testing. See what works before we worry about politics. They spent the rest of the day gathering materials. Dongwu focused on Krillian shell fragments, which were the most common. The insectoid species molted regularly, and their expeditions had left behind plenty of armor pieces. So-Min collected Thendari bioplastic, which was actually a secretion their bodies produced naturally. It was flexible, waterproof, and surprisingly strong when it hardened. Taeho gathered everything else he could find: Vorthan scales, Zephyrian fiber, even pieces of failed technological equipment that might be useful. Yunji documented everything, making sure they knew exactly where each piece came from and what condition it was in. By evening, they had collected enough material to start serious testing. But they also had attracted attention from the colony's other residents. "What are you humans doing?" Veltar approached their work area, his 4 arms crossed in what might have been disapproval. "Research," Dongwu answered honestly. "We're studying the materials that survived contact with the swamp." Veltar's large eyes examined their collection. "Those are not materials. Those are the remains of the honored dead, Krillian warriors who gave their lives attempting the crossing." "We understand that," So-Min said carefully. "We're not trying to dishonor anyone. We're trying to learn from their sacrifice. By playing with their shells like children with toys?" Veltar's voice carried clear offense. Taeho looked up from his testing equipment. "Actually, we're trying to understand why their natural armor succeeded where our artificial materials failed. If we can figure that out, maybe we can create protection that actually works." Veltar was quiet for a long moment. His plates shifted, color slightly, a sign of deep thinking among his people. "You believe you can succeed where we have failed?" "We believe we can try something different," Yunji said diplomatically. "Something that builds on what others have learned instead of ignoring it." "Interesting." Veltar picked up one of his own species' shell fragments. "This belonged to Kethvar, one of our finest warriors. He died in the first hour of his expedition, overwhelmed by creatures despite wearing our best traditional armor." "His armor didn't fail completely," Dongwu pointed out. "It's here, undamaged. That means it protected him from the heat and acid. Something else killed him." Veltar's eyes widened slightly. "You think as warriors think. Most scientists focus on what failed. You examine what succeeded." "That's the idea," So-Min said. "Every failure teaches us something. Every piece of equipment that survived shows us what works." Roku appeared at the edge of their work area, his skin showing the pale blue of curiosity. "The humans collect death-touched materials. This is unusual." "Unusual, but not necessarily wrong," Veltar said thoughtfully. "Perhaps we have been too concerned with honoring the dead to learn from their experiences." Taeho held up a piece of Thendari bioplastic. "This material is incredible. It maintained its flexibility even after exposure to the swamp's chemicals. Your people create this naturally?" Roku's skin brightened. "Yes. It protects us from many underwater dangers, but not from such extreme conditions as the marshlands." "Not by itself," Taeho agreed, "but combined with other materials." The alien expedition leaders exchanged glances. Something in the human approach was beginning to make sense to them, even if it challenged their cultural beliefs. As night fell over Kael'ros Prime, the humans continued their work by artificial light. They had collected the materials they needed for testing. Now they had to prove their theory could work, and they had to do it before the colony's other residents decided their methods were too offensive to tolerate. 2 weeks into their research, the humans had turned a corner of the colony workshop into something that looked like a combination laboratory and junkyard. Pieces of alien shells, scales, and bioplastic covered every surface. Testing equipment hummed constantly, analyzing molecular structures and thermal properties. Tejo wiped sweat from his forehead as he examined his latest test results. This is incredible. When we layer Krillian shell over Thendari bioplastic with Vorthan scales, as the outer coating, the thermal resistance increases by 400%. The acid resistance is even better, Somin added, looking at her own tests. The combination doesn't just resist the acid, it actually neutralizes small amounts of it. Dongwu was working on a different problem. He had pieces of the layered material arranged in patterns, trying to understand how to shape them into something a person could wear. The flexibility is good, but we need joint movement. Nobody can cross a swamp in rigid armor. Yunji looked up from her supply calculations. We have enough material collected to build maybe 3 complete suits. 4, if we're very careful with the cutting. That should be enough for a test expedition, Dongwu said. Small team, limited objectives, just prove the concept works. Their work had not gone unnoticed by the rest of the colony. Every day, more aliens stopped by to watch the humans work with materials that their own cultures considered taboo. Some watched with fascination, others with obvious disgust. The breakthrough came when Somin made a discovery about the swamp's creatures. She had been studying video recordings from previous expeditions, trying to understand how the predators hunted. Look at this, she called the others over to her workstation. Every attack follows the same pattern. The creatures don't respond to heat, movement, or even chemical signatures. They respond to bioelectric fields. Tejo frowned. Bioelectric fields? Every living thing produces electrical activity, Somin explained. Heartbeats, brain activity, muscle contractions. The creatures in the swamp hunt by sensing these electrical signatures. That explains why they ignore non-living equipment but attack anything biological, Dongwu realized. It also explains why they're so effective against different species. They don't hunt by sight or smell. They hunt by life signs. Yunji was already thinking ahead. Can we block bioelectric fields? With the right materials, yes, Tejo said excitedly. Some of these shell fragments show natural electrical resistance. If we incorporate them into the suits, we could make the wearer invisible to the creatures, Somin finished. They worked through the night, redesigning their protective suits to include bioelectric shielding. The new design was more complex, but it addressed the 2 main threats of the marshlands, the environmental hazards, and the predators. The next morning brought visitors. Veltar arrived first, accompanied by 2 other Krillians. Their plates were set in patterns that Dongwu had learned indicated formal displeasure. Humans, Veltar said, his voice more formal than usual. We must speak. Roku appeared next, his skin displaying the deep purple of serious concern. Behind him came several other Thendari, all showing similar color patterns. This has gone too far, one of the Krillians said. His name was Zektal, and he was older than Veltar, with darker plates and more scars. You desecrate the remains of our fallen warriors. You play with death-touched materials as if they were toys, added a Thendari whose skin showed angry, red patches. This brings curse upon all of us. Yunji stepped forward, her military training helping her handle the confrontation calmly. We understand your concerns. We're not trying to disrespect anyone's beliefs or traditions. Then stop this work immediately, Zektal demanded. The Galactic Council has been informed of your activities. They are not pleased. Dongwu looked at their research, then at the alien representatives. What if we could show you that this work honors the dead instead of dishonoring them? Impossible, the Thendari said flatly. Death-touched materials carry spiritual contamination. Nothing good can come from their use. So-Min activated her workstation display, showing the bioelectric field readings. The creatures in the swamp hunt using electrical signatures. Every expedition that failed because the predators could sense the living beings inside their protective equipment. We know this, Veltar said. It is why we developed stronger armor, faster vehicles, more powerful weapons. None succeeded. Because they were fighting the wrong problem, Taeho explained, holding up a piece of their layered material. You were trying to be stronger than the creatures. We're trying to be invisible to them. Roku's skin shifted to a lighter purple, confusion mixed with interest. Invisible? The materials your people left behind, they have properties your living bodies don't, So-Min continued. Kryllian shells naturally disperse electrical fields. Thendari bioplastic insulates against current flow. Vorthan scales actually absorb and store electrical energy. Zektal clicked his plates dismissively. Theory and speculation. Then let us prove it, Dongwu said. One small test. If we're wrong, we'll stop the work and leave the planet. If we're right, if you are right, you will have succeeded where 17 species failed, Veltar said quietly. Using the remains of our honored dead. Using the protection they created with their lives, Yunji corrected. Every piece of shell, every scale, every fragment of bioplastic represents someone who died trying to reach the other side. If we succeed, their deaths will have meaning. The alien representatives talked among themselves in their own languages. Dongwu couldn't understand the words, but the tone was heated debate. Finally, Veltar spoke for the group. One test. Small scale. If you succeed, we will consider allowing you to continue. If you fail, you leave Kelros Prime immediately. Agreed, Dongwu said. But, Roku added, his skin now showing yellow stripes of warning, if your test brings more death, if the creatures become more aggressive, if you make the swamp more dangerous than it already is, the consequences will be severe. Understood, Yunji said formally. After the aliens left, the humans worked even harder to prepare their test. They had one chance to prove their theory, and failure would mean the end of their research. Taeho focused on perfecting the layered armor, making sure every piece fit together properly and provided maximum protection. So-Min studied the swamp's edge, looking for the safest place to conduct their test, somewhere close enough to encounter creatures but far enough from the main colony to avoid endangering others. Dongwu designed the test protocol, planning exactly how they would enter the water, what measurements they would take, and how they would escape if something went wrong. Yunji coordinated everything, making sure they had backup plans for their backup plans. 3 days later, they were ready. The test suit was complete, incorporating materials from 6 different alien species. The bioelectric shielding was in place. The entry point was selected and prepared. Word had spread throughout the colony. When test day arrived, nearly every resident came to watch. Some hoped to see the humans succeed. Others expected to watch them fail spectacularly. Dongwu put on the suit as the crowd gathered. The layered materials felt strange against his skin, lighter than he expected, but incredibly strong. The bioelectric shielding created a subtle tingling sensation. All readings normal, Somin reported from her monitoring station. Thermal protection active, acid resistance confirmed, electrical shielding operational. Veltar stood near the shoreline, his 4 arms crossed. This is either the bravest thing I have ever witnessed, or the most foolish. Sometimes, Dongwu said, checking his equipment one final time. There's not much difference between the two. He walked toward the edge of the thermic marshlands, carrying 300 years of failed dreams and the hopes of 17 different species. The water looked as angry and dangerous as ever. Steam rose from its surface, and bright lights moved in the depths, the creatures that had killed so many. But for the first time in 3 centuries, someone was about to enter their domain with protection made from the very materials they had. Tested their teeth and claws against. Dongwu stepped into the boiling water. The first step into the thermic marshlands felt like stepping into another world. Dongwu had expected the heat to hit him immediately, but the layered suit held firm. The water reached his ankles, then his knees, and still the internal temperature remained stable. Temperature readings normal, Somin's voice crackled through the communication system. Suit integrity holding at 100%. Behind him on the shore, the crowd of aliens watched in tense silence. Many had seen their own people enter these same waters, never to return. The fact that a human was still standing after 30 seconds was already more success than most expeditions achieved. Dongwu took another step deeper. The water reached his waist now, and he could see the glow of creatures moving below the surface. Bright blue and green lights drifted through the murky water like deadly stars. Bioelectric readings? He asked through his helmet communicator. Incredible, Tejo responded from the monitoring station. The shielding is working perfectly. Your electrical signature is almost completely masked. One of the glowing creatures moved closer to Dongwu's position. It was larger than he had expected, maybe 3 meters long, with a body that seemed to be made of flowing light. Tentacles trailed behind it as it moved, and its entire form pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The creature passed within arm's reach of Dongwu and showed no sign of noticing him. It continued on its path, hunting for prey it couldn't detect. Phase. Unsuccessful, Dongwu reported. The creatures can't sense me. From the shore, he heard surprised voices speaking in multiple alien languages. Veltar's voice carried clearly over the others. Impossible! That creature should have attacked immediately! Dongwu moved deeper into the water, now chest deep, in the boiling marshland. The suit's cooling systems worked steadily, keeping his body temperature normal despite the extreme environment outside. The acid that had dissolved so many previous expeditions rolled off the layered armor like ordinary water. Suit performance remains optimal, Somin reported. All systems functioning normally. More creatures appeared around Dongwu as he moved, further from shore. Some were similar to the first, flowing, tentacled beings of living light. Others were different. Angular creatures with crystalline shells, flat ray-like animals that glided through the water, and things that defied easy description. None of them showed any interest in the human walking among them. This is remarkable, Dongwu said, watching a school of small glowing fish swim past his helmet. They're not aggressive at all when they can't sense prey. How deep are you planning to go? Yunji asked from the monitoring station. Dongwu checked his position relative to the shore. He was now 50 meters out into the marshland, deeper than any previous expedition had managed in their first hour. Just a little further. I want to test the suit against some of the gas vents. He found a vent system about 20 meters ahead. Bubbles of toxic gas rose from cracks in the swamp floor, creating a cloudy area where the water was even hotter than the surrounding marsh. Previous expeditions had reported that these vents were particularly dangerous, with temperatures exceeding 250 degrees and gas concentrations that could kill in minutes. Dongwu approached the vent carefully. The first wisps of toxic gas reached his suit, and he monitored the readings on his internal display. Gas filtration systems working normally. Temperature rising but still within safe limits. He positioned himself directly over the vent. Superheated. Water and toxic gases swirled around him, creating a hellish environment that would have killed any unprotected life form instantly. The suit held firm. Incredible. Taeho's voice showed genuine amazement. The Krillian shell is dispersing the heat faster than the environment can transfer it. The Thundari bioplastic is flexing with the pressure changes. The Vorthan scales are actually storing some of the thermal energy for later release. And the bioelectric shielding? Dongwu asked. Perfect. Even with all this environmental stress, your electrical signature remains completely masked. A large creature emerged from the depths near the vent. This one was different from the others. Bigger, with more aggressive-looking appendages and brighter bioluminescent patterns. It moved with the confidence of an apex predator, the kind of creature that had destroyed entire expeditions. The predator passed within touching distance of Dongwu, close enough that he could see the details of its alien anatomy. Its body was covered in natural armor that looked similar to Krillian shells, but adapted for life in the extreme environment. Multiple eyes scanned the area, looking for prey. It found nothing. After several minutes of hunting, the creature moved away, disappearing back into the depths of the marshland. Phase 2 complete, Dongwu reported. Even the apex predators can't detect me. From the shore, Veltar's voice carried a note of amazement. That was a void stalker. They have destroyed our largest expedition vehicles. How is it possible that it ignored you completely? Because, Somin answered, we're not fighting the swamp. We're working with it. Dongwu began his return journey to shore, moving carefully through the toxic environment. The creatures continued to ignore him, going about their natural behaviors as if he wasn't there. Schools of bioluminescent fish swam around his legs. Larger predators passed by without showing any hunting instincts. The suit continued to perform, flawlessly. Every system remained operational. Every protective layer did its job. By the time Dongwu reached waist-deep water, he had been in the marshland for over an hour, longer than most expeditions survived. As he emerged from the water, the crowd on the shore erupted in excited conversation. Aliens who had watched their own people die in those same waters couldn't believe what they had witnessed. Veltar was the first to approach as Dongwu removed his helmet. This should not be possible. You walked among void stalkers. You stood over thermal vents. You breathed in areas where our atmospheric processors failed. The suit worked exactly as designed, Dongwu replied, his face showing the exhaustion of the test but also the satisfaction of success. The materials your people left behind, they weren't failures. They were learning opportunities. Roku approached next, his skin showing rapid color changes that indicated extreme emotional confusion. You used death-touched materials to achieve life. This challenges everything we believed about the cursed nature of such things. Zektal, the older Krillian who had opposed the test, examined the suit carefully. His plates had shifted to a lighter color, a sign of deep thought among his people. The shells of Kethvar and others. They protected you, as they could not protect their original owners. They learned from their experience, Taeho explained, helping Dongwu out of the suit. Every expedition that failed taught us something about what works and what doesn't. We just had to be willing to listen. Yunji was already analyzing the data from the test. Suit performance exceeded all projections. Bioelectric shielding was 100% effective. Thermal and chemical. Protection held up under extreme conditions. Most importantly, we now know the crossing is possible. The implications of the successful test spread quickly through the colony. Within hours, representatives from multiple species were requesting meetings with the human team. Some wanted to understand the technology, others wanted to discuss joint expeditions. A few wanted to purchase human-built suits for their own crossing attempts. But the most important conversation came from Veltar. "You have proven your concept works," he said, finding Dongwu that evening as the human team celebrated their success. But a single test is not the same as a full crossing. The marshlands are vast. There will be challenges you have not yet encountered. "We know," Dongwu admitted. This was just the beginning. Veltar's plates shifted to show respect, a gesture rarely given to members of other species. "My people have materials we shed, naturally. Shells, armor plates, biochemical secretions. If your theory is correct, these materials have been wasted while we mourn their owners." "You're offering to help?" Somin asked, joining the conversation. "I am offering a partnership," Veltar corrected. "You have shown that the dead can protect the living in ways we never imagined. Perhaps it is time for the Krillians to honor our fallen by helping others succeed where they could not." Roku appeared at the edge of their conversation, his skin showing the bright blue of excitement. "The Thendari Council has reached the same conclusion. Our bioplastic is naturally renewable. We can provide fresh materials for suit construction." Other alien representatives approached throughout the evening, each offering resources and support for what everyone now realized was humanity's genuine attempt to solve the impossible problem. By the end of the night, what had started as a small human research project had become a multi-species collaboration. The materials that had once been considered cursed remains were now recognized as valuable resources. The crossing attempt that had seemed like human foolishness was now seen as the first real hope for success in 3 centuries. But Dongwu knew the real test was still ahead. Walking 50 meters into the marshland was one thing. Crossing an entire continent of boiling death was something else entirely. Still, for the first time since arriving on Kael'ros Prime, the impossible seemed merely difficult. And humans had always been good at difficult. The success of the first test changed everything in the colony. What had been whispered conversations about the strange humans became open discussions about the first real hope for crossing the marshlands in 3 centuries. But success also brought new problems. Dongwu discovered the first issue 3 days after the test when he found Veltar waiting outside the human workshop early in the morning. "We need to talk privately," the Krillian said, his plates showing the dark patterns that indicated serious concern. They walked to a quiet area away from the main colony buildings. Veltar looked around carefully before speaking. "Last night, my people held a formal council meeting about your suit design," he began. "The vote was close, but they have decided to secretly provide you with additional shell materials." "That's good news, isn't it?" Dongwu asked. Veltar's plates shifted to show conflict. "Yes and no. My people are divided. Some believe helping, You honors our dead. Others think we are betraying sacred traditions. If the Council of Elders discovers we are providing materials, there could be serious consequences. What kind of consequences? Exile from Krillian space. Loss of trading. Rights. Possibly worse. Veltar paused. But we have decided the potential benefits outweigh the risks. The quantum crystals could fund colony expansion for generations. More importantly, success would prove our fallen warriors did not die for nothing. That afternoon, Roku approached Somin with a similar conversation. The Thendari's skin showed the pale yellow of nervous excitement as he spoke. "My people have reached a decision about your expedition," Roku said, his tentacle-like legs shifting restlessly. "We will provide bioplastic materials, but it must be done in secret." "Secret from who?" Somin asked. "The Thendari Spiritual Council. They still believe death-touched materials carry spiritual contamination. If they discover we are helping they could declare our entire colony spiritually unclean." Roku's skin darkened with worry. "But the commercial benefits of success are too valuable to ignore. The quantum crystals would make any participating species incredibly wealthy." Meanwhile, Jin Wu had arrived on the latest supply ship, bringing advanced metallurgy equipment and a fresh perspective on the materials problem. He was older than the others, with steady hands and the kind of patience that came from years of working with difficult materials. "I've reviewed your test data," Jin Wu said, examining the suit that had successfully entered the marshlands. "The design is good, but it won't scale up for a full crossing." "What do you mean?" Taeho asked. Jin Wu pointed to stress marks on the suit's joints. "This works for a short test, but a continent-spanning journey would take weeks. The materials will fatigue, the seals will degrade, and the bioelectric shielding will lose effectiveness over time." "So we need better materials?" Yunji suggested. "We need more materials," Jin Wu corrected. "Multiple suits per person, replacement components, and backup systems for everything critical. A real crossing expedition needs enough equipment for a small army." The scale of what they were attempting began to sink in. Building one test suit had required materials from dozens of failed expeditions. Equipping a full crossing team would require materials from hundreds. Fortunately, their secret alien supporters were more helpful than expected. Veltar began providing fresh Krillian shells from his people's natural molting process. Every few weeks, Krillians shed their outer armor, plates as they grew. These materials had always been considered waste products before, but they proved perfect for suit construction. Roku arranged for regular deliveries of Thendari bioplastic, which his people produced as a natural bodily function. The material was incredibly versatile, serving as both flexible armor and waterproof sealing. Other species quietly began contributing as well. A Vorthon trader named Ixen started leaving crystalline scales in areas where the humans would find them. A Zephyrian engineer called Quilm provided fiber materials that were excellent for internal suit structure, but the most surprising supporter was Zektal, the older Krillian who had initially opposed their work. "I have been thinking about your test," Zektal said, approaching Dongwu one evening. "You succeeded where our strongest warriors failed, not because you were stronger, but because you were smarter." "We learned from their experience," Dongwu replied diplomatically. Zektal's plates shifted to show grudging respect. "In my younger days, I led 3 expeditions into the marshlands. I lost good people each time. I have always blamed the swamp for their deaths." He paused, looking toward the distant steam rising from the thermal waters. But watching your test, I realized something. The swamp did not kill them out of malice. It simply existed as it always has. We were the ones who entered unprepared. Your people weren't unprepared, Dongwu said. They just didn't have the right tools. They had the right tools, Zektal corrected. They simply did not know how to use them properly. The shells that protected them in life could have protected others in death. We were too focused on honoring tradition to learn from experience. Zektal became one of their most valuable supporters, providing not just materials, but knowledge. He knew the marshlands better than almost anyone alive, having survived 3 separate expeditions into its depths. The thermal vents follow patterns, he explained to the team one day, pointing to maps of the swamp. They are more active during certain times of day. The creatures have feeding cycles that correspond to these patterns. If you time your movement correctly, you can avoid the worst dangers. Jin Wu found Zektal's information invaluable for planning their route. If we can predict where the vents will be most active, we can plan rest stops in safer areas. There are no safe areas in the marshlands, Zektal warned, only areas that are less dangerous than others. As their preparation continued, word of the human project spread beyond Kael'ros Prime. Other colonies sent representatives to observe their work. Some came to learn, others to offer support, and a few to try to steal their techniques. The Galactic Council sent an official observer, a bureaucrat named Thylix, who spent most of his time writing reports about permit violations and safety concerns. This entire project lacks proper authorization, Thylix complained during one of his visits. Crossing attempts require approval from 17 different agencies. How long does that approval process take? Yunji asked. Typically 7 to 12 years, assuming all paperwork is filed correctly. Veltar's plates clicked with what might have been laughter. By that time, the humans will have crossed the marshlands, established trade routes, and probably built cities on the far shore. The pressure from official channels was annoying, but not particularly threatening. More concerning were the other species who had decided to launch their own crossing attempts using traditional methods. A consortium of Hexani merchants announced they were building the largest force field generator ever constructed, powerful enough to push aside the marshland waters entirely. A group of Zephyrian explorers claimed they were developing atmospheric processors that could neutralize the toxic gases and create safe breathing spaces above the swamp. The Quinn military was constructing submarines with armor so thick they claimed nothing in the marshlands could penetrate it. Competition, Roku observed, his skin showing the orange of mild concern. They hope to reach the quantum crystals before you do. Let them try, Dongwu said. We're not racing anyone, we're solving a problem. But privately he knew they were racing against time. The more attention their project attracted, the more pressure they faced to either succeed quickly or abandon the attempt entirely. Jin Wu had completed his analysis of their material requirements. For a 4-person crossing team, we need components for 12 complete suits plus backup materials for field repairs. That's more than we can collect from naturally shed materials in reasonable time. What are you suggesting? So-Min asked. We need to start working with materials from the actual expedition remains, Jin Wu said, the shells and armor pieces scattered around the marshland shores. There are enough materials there to equip several expeditions. Taeho understood the implication immediately. But those materials come from people who died trying to make the crossing. Which is exactly why we should use them, Yunji said firmly. Every piece of equipment, every fragment of armor, every tool represents someone who died trying to reach the other side. If we succeed using their materials, their deaths gain meaning. Veltar agreed. Kethvar and the others would want their sacrifice to help others succeed. It is the most honorable use of their remains. Even Roku, despite his people's taboos about death-touched materials, supported the decision. The Thendari believed the spirits of the dead find peace when their purpose is fulfilled. Perhaps crossing the marshlands was always their purpose. As the sun set over Kelros Prime that evening, the human team began planning their collection of materials from the actual expedition sites. They had moved beyond testing and preparation into the final phase before attempting the crossing itself, but they also knew they were running out of time. Other expeditions were preparing to launch, official pressure was mounting, and the marshlands themselves remained as dangerous as ever. Success was no longer just a possibility, it was becoming a necessity. The morning of the Great Crossing dawned with unusual activity in the colony. 2 expeditions were preparing to launch on the same day, after 3 centuries of failed attempts. The irony was not lost on anyone watching. On the eastern launch platform, the Allied Species Consortium had assembled the most expensive expedition in galactic history. Their force field generators stood 30 meters tall, powered by fusion reactors that could supply energy to an entire city. Hover platforms carried environmental suits worth more than small planets. The expedition team included the best scientists, engineers, and explorers from 12 different species. Impressive, Dongwu admitted, watching the alien expedition prepare from a distance. They've got enough technology there to terraform a moon, and enough firepower to fight a small war, Yunji added, noting the military escort vehicles armed with plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes. On the western shore, the human expedition looked almost primitive by comparison. 4 people in shell composite suits, carrying basic supplies and simple equipment. Their total budget was less than what the alien expedition spent on lunch. Veltar approached the human team as they made final preparations. His plates showed the deep blue of respect mixed with concern. The Allied Consortium launched 30 minutes ago. Their force fields are already pushing back the marshland waters. Good for them, So-Min said, checking her bioelectric readings one final time. We'll take a different approach. Jinwoo was making last-minute adjustments to Dongwu's suit. The materials had been carefully layered and shaped over the past month, incorporating lessons learned from hundreds of failed expeditions. Krillian, shells formed the thermal layer. Thendari bioplastic provided flexibility and acid resistance, and Vorthon scales created the outer protective barrier. Remember, Jinwoo said as he sealed the final connections, these suits are designed for endurance, not speed. Don't push too hard early in the crossing. Taeho was suited up next, his equipment optimized for materials analysis and field repairs. If something went wrong with their protective gear, he would be responsible for fixing it using whatever resources they could find in the marshlands. Yunji wore the lightest suit, designed for mobility and communication. Her job was to maintain contact with the colony and coordinate their movement through the swamp. So-Min's suit included the most sophisticated sensor equipment. She would monitor the environment, track creature movements, and navigate their route through the safest areas Zektal had identified. All systems checked normal, So-Min reported as they approached the marshland shore. Bioelectric shielding is active. Thermal protection is operational. Communication links are clear. Behind them, Most of the colony had gathered to watch. Representatives from dozens of species stood on viewing platforms, many recording the event for historical archives. The last time anyone had attempted a full crossing was 8 years ago. The last time anyone had succeeded was never. Status. Report on the Allied Consortium? Dongwu asked through his helmet communicator. Roku's voice came back from the monitoring station. Their force fields are working as designed. They have pushed back the water over a 30-meter corridor and are advancing at 12 kilometers per hour. Impressive speed, Yunji commented. Expensive speed, Veltar corrected. They are consuming energy at rates that cannot be sustained for more than 18 hours. Zekatal approached for final instructions. The old Krillian had become their unofficial guide, providing detailed maps and tactical advice based on his 3 failed expeditions. Remember the thermal vent patterns, he said seriously. Active periods begin 2 hours after local dawn and peak at midday. The creatures are most aggressive during feeding time, which corresponds to maximum vent activity. We'll time our rest periods accordingly, Dongwu confirmed. Also, Zektal continued, there are areas where the water depth changes rapidly. The Allied Consortium's hover platforms will have no problem, but you will be walking. Be prepared. For sudden depth changes? Understood. Zektal's plates shifted to show formal respect. You carry the hopes of everyone who has ever attempted this crossing. May the spirits of the fallen guide your path. The human team entered the marshlands at exactly noon, when thermal vent activity was at its peak and the creatures were most active. It seemed like the worst possible time to begin a crossing, but it was actually part of their strategy. If we can handle the marshlands at their most dangerous, Somin had reasoned, we can handle them at any time. The water was immediately hostile, with temperatures exceeding 200 degrees and acid levels that could dissolve unprotected organic matter in minutes. Steam rose around them as they moved deeper, and the glow of hunting creatures was visible even through the murky water. Suits performing normally, Tejo reported. No thermal stress, no acid damage, bioelectric shielding holding steady. Unlike their test run, this time they encountered creatures immediately. A school of small predators swam past within the first 100 meters, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing as they searched for prey. The creatures showed no interest in the humans. Phase 1 successful, Dongwu reported. We're invisible to the local wildlife. Behind them, they could see the Allied Consortium's force field corridor in the distance. The alien expedition was making good time, their hover platforms moving smoothly over the pushed-back water. But even from this distance, they could see the massive energy discharges required to maintain the barriers. They're burning through power awfully fast, Yunji observed. Their plan assumes they can reach the other side before their reactors fail, Somin said. It's a viable strategy, if nothing goes wrong. The humans moved much more slowly, but their approach was designed for sustainability rather than speed. They could maintain their pace for weeks if necessary, and their suits required no external power beyond what their bodies naturally provided. 2 hours into the crossing, they encountered their first major challenge. The water depth increased, suddenly from waist-deep to over their heads, forcing them to swim through the boiling marshland. This is where most expeditions have problems, So Min noted, checking her sensors. Swimming requires more energy and creates stronger bioelectric signatures. But their suits handled the transition smoothly. The Thendari bioplastic flexed naturally with their swimming motions, while the layered shell materials continued to provide protection. Most importantly, the bioelectric shielding remained effective even during vigorous physical activity. They swam for nearly an hour before reaching shallower water where they could walk again. During that time, dozens of creatures passed near them, including several of the large predators that had destroyed previous expeditions. None showed any interest in the humans. Status report on the Allied Consortium, Dongwu asked during their first rest stop. Roku's voice came back with concerning news. They've encountered technical difficulties. One of their force field generators failed, creating a gap in their protective corridor. They're attempting repairs, but they've lost 2 hours of progress. Any casualties? Not yet, but they've had to retreat to their starting position. The water rushed back into their corridor when the field failed. Yunji checked their own progress. We're maintaining steady pace. No equipment failures, no suit problems. At this rate, we'll reach the midpoint in 4 days. The Allied Consortium planned to reach the midpoint in 1 day, Taeho noted. Plans and reality don't always match, Dongwu replied. As evening approached, they reached their first planned rest area, a section of marshland where Zektal's maps showed lower thermal vent activity and reduced creature density. It wasn't safe by normal standards, but it was as close to safe as anywhere in the marshlands offered. They set up their temporary shelter on a small island of solid ground, barely large enough for 4 people. The structure was simple, just a basic framework covered with spare bioplastic to keep out the worst of the toxic gases. Day 1 complete, Somin reported to the colony. All team members healthy, all equipment functional. No creature encounters, no suit failures. Excellent news, Veltar's voice came back. The Allied Consortium has made repairs and resumed their advance, but they are now 8 hours behind their original schedule. What about their energy reserves? Yunji asked. Reduced to 60%. They are pushing their remaining generators harder to make up for lost time. As night fell, over the marshlands, the human team settled in to rest. Around them, the swamp continued its deadly activity. Creatures hunted in the glowing waters, thermal vents released their toxic gases, and the environment maintained its constant assault on anything brave enough or foolish enough to enter its domain. But for the first time in 3 centuries, someone was spending the night in the heart of the thermic marshlands and expecting to see morning. The race was far from over, but the humans had proven their approach could work over extended periods. Now they had to prove it could work for an entire continent. Tomorrow we reach the deep marshlands, Somin said quietly as they prepared to sleep. That's where the real test begins. We'll handle it, Dongwu replied with quiet confidence. We've got the best protection in the galaxy. Protection built. From failure, Taeho added. The best kind, Yunji concluded. Day 5 of the crossing brought the first real crisis. Yunji stepped wrong on what looked like solid ground and fell through into a thermal vent chamber hidden beneath the marshland floor. Superheated water and toxic gas erupted around her as she plunged into a pocket of hell that registered over 300 degrees. Yunji! Dongwu shouted, reaching for her as she disappeared into the boiling chaos. The others moved quickly but carefully. Somin used her sensors to map the hidden chamber, while Taeho and Dongwu worked to extract their teammate from what should have been certain death. I'm okay, Yunji's voice came through the communicator, strained but steady. The suit is holding, but I think something's damaged. They pulled her out of the vent chamber after 10 minutes that felt like hours. Her suit showed visible damage. Several of the outer Vorthon scales had cracked, and acid had eaten through part of the bioplastic ceiling around her left leg. How bad is it? She asked, unable to see the damage herself. Taeho examined the suit carefully. Bad enough. The thermal protection is compromised, and you're losing bioelectric shielding. In another few hours, the creatures will be able to sense you. Can you fix it? Not with what we brought. Tae-ho looked around at the hostile environment surrounding them. I need more materials. They were 5 days into the marshlands, deeper than any previous expedition had survived. Going back wasn't really an option. They had passed the point where retreat was safer than continuing forward, but continuing with damaged equipment would be suicide. There, So-min pointed to something in the water about 50 meters away. Is that what I think it is? Half buried in the marshland floor was the wreckage of an old expedition vehicle. The metal was corroded and twisted, but pieces of it were still intact. More importantly, scattered around the wreck were fragments of protective equipment from whoever had been inside. Krillian expedition, Dongwu identified, studying the design of the wreckage. Probably 15 years old, based on the armor pattern. Perfect, Tae-ho said grimly. Krillian shells from that period had excellent acid resistance. If I can salvage enough pieces, I can patch Eunji's suit. Working in the middle of the marshlands to repair critical equipment while surrounded by deadly creatures was not something any of them had trained for. But the alternative was watching Eunji die slowly as her suit failed. Tae-ho swam to the wreck site while the others formed a protective circle around him. The water was deeper here, over their heads, and the creature activity was intense. Glowing. Predators moved constantly through the area, attracted by the electromagnetic anomalies created by the old wreckage. Hurry! So-min urged, watching her sensors. We've got 3 large creatures moving this way, and they're showing hunting behavior. Tae-ho worked frantically to extract usable shell fragments from the wreck. The materials had been tested by 15 years of marshland conditions, making them perfectly suited for emergency repairs. But getting them loose from the corroded vehicle required more time than they had. Contact, Dongwu announced as the first creature came into visual range. It was one of the apex predators, a void stalker similar to the one that had ignored him during the initial test. But this time, something was different. The creature seemed confused, moving in erratic patterns as if it could sense something but couldn't locate it precisely. Eunji's damaged suit, So-min realized. It's leaking, just enough bioelectric signature to confuse the creature's hunting instincts. The Void Stalker circled their position, getting closer with each pass. Its bioluminescent patterns pulsed with increasing intensity, indicating growing agitation. Soon it would either locate the source of the electrical signature or call for help from other predators. Got it, Tae-ho announced, pulling free several large pieces of Krillian shell. These should be enough for temporary repairs. They moved quickly to shallower water where Tae-ho could work on Eunji's suit. The repair process was crude but effective. Layers of salvaged shell material sealed over the damaged areas with bioplastic adhesive that Roku had provided. How does it feel? Tae-ho asked as he completed the patch job. Eunji tested the repaired sections carefully. Strange but functional. The bioelectric shielding is back to normal levels. The Void Stalker's behavior changed immediately. Its agitated hunting patterns stopped, and it returned to normal cruising behavior, no longer able to sense potential prey in the area. Crisis resolved, Dongwu reported to the colony. Temporary equipment failure, but we've made repairs using salvage materials. Understood. Veltar's voice came back. How is your progress compared to the Allied Consortium? So-min checked their position against the planned route. We're actually ahead of schedule. The Allied Consortium had more power failures yesterday and had to retreat again. They're down to 30% energy reserves, Roku added from the monitoring station. At current consumption rates, they have maybe 8 more hours of operation before their force fields fail completely. The humans continued their crossing, now moving through the deepest part of the marshlands. Here, the water was over their heads most of the time, forcing them to swim through the hostile environment for hours at a stretch. The thermal vents were larger and more active, creating underwater geysers of superheated acid that could kill instantly. But they also found something unexpected. "Look at this," So Min said, pointing to readings on her sensors. "The quantum crystal formations aren't just on the far shore. There are deposits throughout the marshlands." Jin Wu studied the sensor data. "These readings suggest the entire marshland is built on top of a massive crystal formation. The thermal activity, the unique chemistry, it's all connected to the quantum field interactions." Which means, Yunji realized, the marshlands aren't just an obstacle blocking access to the crystals. They're part of the crystal formation itself. The implications were staggering. Previous expeditions had viewed the marshlands as something to be overcome or bypassed, but if the swamp was actually an integrated part of the quantum crystal ecosystem, then understanding it was key to safely harvesting the crystals. "We need samples," Somin said. "From what?" Taeho asked. "Everything. Water, gas, creature tissue, if we can get it safely. The aliens have been thinking about this wrong for 3 centuries. They spent the next day collecting samples while continuing their crossing. The work was dangerous, requiring them to get close to active thermal vents and aggressive creatures. But their shell composite suits provided protection that allowed them to work in areas where previous expeditions would have been destroyed immediately. Day 7 brought them within sight of the far shore. The Allied consortium had finally resumed their advance after extensive repairs, but they were now 2 days behind their original schedule and running on emergency power reserves. "They're pushing too hard," Yunji observed, watching the distant glow of force field generators in the distance. "Those energy readings are unsustainable." As if summoned by her words, a brilliant flash lit up the horizon behind them. One of the Allied Consortium's fusion reactors had failed catastrophically, taking out half their remaining force field capacity. "Emergency situation," Roku's voice crackled through the communication system. "The Allied Consortium is requesting immediate evacuation. They've lost primary power, and their protective barriers are failing." Dong-Wu looked back toward the distant light show where the alien expedition was fighting for survival. "How long? Until their fields collapse completely?" "Maybe 2 hours. The humans were less than a day from completing their crossing. They could reach safety and return with rescue equipment, but by then the Allied Consortium would likely be dead." "We have to help them," Yunji said firmly. "With what?" Taeho asked. "We don't have equipment for a rescue mission." "We have something better," So Min said, understanding Yunji's thinking. "We have suits that work." The decision was unanimous. They changed course, swimming back through the marshlands toward the failing alien expedition. It would cost them at least 12 hours and put them in additional danger, but leaving people to die was not an option. They found the Allied Consortium expedition in chaos. 3 of their hover platforms had crashed when the force fields failed. Dozens of expedition members were trapped in emergency shelters that wouldn't protect them for long against the marshland environment. Humans? The expedition leader, a Hexani named Vrix, couldn't believe what he was seeing. "You came back for us?" "Nobody dies on our watch," Dongwu said simply. The rescue operation took 18 hours. Using their shell composite suits, the Humans were able to move safely through areas the alien expedition couldn't enter. They evacuated the most critically injured first, carrying them to the nearest stable ground. Then they worked to salvage what equipment they could from the wreckage. "Your suits," Vrick said wonderingly as Dongwu carried him to safety. "They're made from our fallen comrades' remains." "Made to honor their sacrifice," Dongwu corrected. "Every piece of shell, every scale, every fragment of bioplastic represents someone who died trying to cross these marshlands. We're just helping them finish what they started." By the time the rescue was complete, the humans had been in the marshlands for 9 days. They were exhausted, their suits were showing wear, and they were still a full day from the far shore. 10 days after entering the thermic marshlands, Dongwu took his first step onto solid ground that wasn't trying to kill him. The far shore of the continental swamp stretched ahead, covered in crystal formations that pulsed with their own inner light. "We made it," So-Min said, her voice carrying exhaustion and wonder in equal measure. Behind them, the marshlands continued their eternal boiling fury. Steam rose from the water, creatures glowed in the depths, and thermal vents sent toxic gases into the air. But for the first time in 3 centuries, someone had walked all the way across and lived to tell about it. "Status report," Yunji said, checking her equipment one final time. "All team members alive and functional. All suits operational despite extensive wear. Mission objectives complete." Taeho was already studying the quantum crystal formations that covered the shoreline. "These readings are incredible. The crystals here are pure quantum matrix, completely stable and ready for harvesting. We're looking at enough energy storage to power the entire galactic trade network for decades." But Dongwu was thinking about something else entirely. He looked back across the marshlands, then at the crystal-covered ground beneath his feet, then at the shell composite suit that had kept him alive for 10 days in hell. "This isn't the end," he said quietly. "This is the beginning." The rescue of the Allied Consortium had changed everything. Word of the human crossing spread through the galaxy faster than light-speed communication could carry it. Not just that they had succeeded where 17 species had failed, but that they had turned back to save their competitors rather than claiming victory for themselves. Within hours of their successful crossing, ships from dozens of species were heading toward Kelros Prime. Scientists wanted to study the suits. Engineers wanted to understand the technology. Merchants wanted to negotiate trade agreements for quantum crystal access. But the most important visitors were the families of those who had died in previous crossing attempts. Veltar was among the first to arrive on the far shore, transported by emergency shuttle. His plates showed patterns of deep emotion as he examined the shell composite suits. "Kethvar's shell," he said, recognizing pieces of his fallen comrade's armor in Dongwu's suit. It finally completed the crossing. "All of them did," So-Min said, gesturing to the suits worn by the team. "Every piece of material, every fragment of protection, they all made it across." Roku arrived next, his skin displaying the bright blue of amazement mixed with spiritual awe. The death-touched materials. They carried life across the impossible barrier. "They weren't death-touched," Jinwoo corrected gently. "They were life-touched. Every piece represented someone's determination to reach this shore. We just helped them finish the journey." More aliens arrived throughout the day, many carrying materials from their own failed expeditions. Shells, scales, bioplastic, crystalline armor, the remains of 3 centuries of failed dreams. "We want to contribute," announced Thylix, the Galactic Council bureaucrat who had once threatened to shut down their project. "The Council formally requests human assistance in establishing permanent crossing routes." "Routes?" Dongwu asked. "Not just single crossings," Thylix explained. "Permanent installations. Safe paths through the marshlands that any species can use. The quantum crystals are valuable enough to justify major infrastructure investment." Yunji understood the implications immediately. "You want us to build a road across the marshlands?" "More than a road," Veltar said. "A symbol. Proof that cooperation can overcome any obstacle." The construction project that followed became the largest engineering effort in galactic history. Species that had competed for centuries worked together, contributing materials and expertise to build what became known as the Shell Road. The design was elegantly simple. Platforms made from layered alien materials created safe resting points, every few kilometers across the marshlands. Each platform was constructed using the same shell composite technology that had protected the human team, making them resistant to the swamp's thermal and chemical assault. But the most important innovation was cultural, not technological. "Every species contributes materials willingly," Roku explained to a gathering of galactic dignitaries 6 months after the first crossing. Krillians provide shells from natural molting. Thindari offer bioplastic from normal biological processes. Vortons contribute scales they shed naturally. What was once considered waste or cursed remains, Veltar added, is now recognized as valuable resource for protecting life. Zekatal, despite his advanced age, insisted on overseeing the construction of the first permanent platform. "I lost warriors in these waters," he said, his plates showing the deep purple of solemn determination. "Now their sacrifice builds something that will save countless lives." The Shell Road took 2 years to complete, but when it was finished, it revolutionized galactic trade and exploration. What had once been an impossible barrier became a highway connecting 2 halves of the continent. Quantum crystal mining operations established on the far shore provided energy for expanding civilizations throughout the galaxy. More importantly, the project changed how different species viewed cooperation and resourcefulness. The humans taught us something valuable, admitted Vrix, the Hexani expedition leader whose team the humans had rescued. "Advanced technology is impressive, but practical solutions using available resources are often more effective." The Shell Road platforms became gathering places where different species met and traded not just goods but ideas and cultural perspectives. Young aliens from across the galaxy came to study what they called human engineering, the art of solving impossible problems with simple, practical solutions. So men established the first research station on the far shore, studying the quantum crystal ecosystem that had created the marshlands. Her discoveries led to new understanding of how quantum fields interacted with biological systems, opening entirely new fields of scientific research. Tejo founded the Galactic Materials Institute, teaching other species how to work with naturally occurring biological materials instead of relying solely on manufactured technology. His students learned to see waste products as potential resources, failure as learning opportunity. Jin Wu became the chief architect for what became known as the Impossible Projects Division, taking on engineering challenges that other species had declared unsolvable. His motto, inscribed above every project office, read, "There are no impossible problems, only incomplete solutions." Yunji coordinated the establishment of Shell Road maintenance stations, training mixed-species crews to keep the crossing routes safe and operational. Her logistics network became a model for interspecies cooperation that was adopted throughout the galaxy. But Dongwu remained focused on the original lesson of their success. Every piece of equipment that failed taught us something about what works, he explained to a group of young engineers from 12 different species. Every expedition that didn't succeed provided materials and knowledge for those who came after. Nothing was wasted. No sacrifice was meaningless. 5 years after the first crossing, Dongwu stood on the central platform of the Shell Road, watching a steady stream of travelers move safely across what had once been an impossible barrier. Merchants carried trade goods between the shores. Scientists transported research equipment to the crystal fields. Families took vacation trips across the marshlands, sightseeing in what had once been the most dangerous place in the galaxy. Hard to believe it was ever considered impossible, So-Min said, joining him on the observation deck. It never was impossible, Dongwu replied. Just difficult, and humans have always been good at difficult. Below them, the thermic marshlands continued their eternal activity. The water still boiled, the creatures still hunted, the thermal vents still released their toxic gases. But now, instead of being an insurmountable obstacle, the swamp had become part of the solution, its own hostile environment providing the testing ground that made the Shell Road materials stronger and more reliable. The quantum crystals that had originally motivated the crossing attempts funded expansion projects throughout the galaxy. New colonies were established on previously unreachable worlds. Trade routes were opened between species that had never interacted before. Scientific research advanced by centuries as resources became available for projects that had been considered too expensive. But the most valuable result was something that couldn't be measured in credits or energy units. Look at that, Yunji said, pointing to a group of young aliens working together to repair a damaged platform section. Krillians worked alongside Thendari, sharing tools and techniques. Vorthons collaborated with Hexani on structural improvements. Species that had competed for centuries now cooperated automatically. The real treasure wasn't the quantum crystals, Teho observed, watching the mixed species crew work with easy familiarity. It was learning that cooperation makes everything possible. Jin Wu nodded toward a new construction project visible on the horizon. Another impossible engineering challenge that had become merely difficult once the right approach was found. The Galactic Council just approved funding for the Void Bridge project, connecting solar systems that are separated by empty space.